Good evening. Good to see so many people here. My name is Dr. Kimberly Macquarie, and I am the Director of Education and Programs here at the Dalí. And it is my distinct pleasure to be able to welcome you here tonight for poetry at the Dalí, whether you're joining us here at the museum or virtually from afar. We also welcome our YouTube viewers. Now, of course, here at the Dalí, poetry feels right at home. For most of you who are familiar with our collection, you'll know that Dalí was not only a painter of dreams, he was also a thinker, a writer, and a provocateur of language. And surrealism itself was born not from images, but from words, from the poetic instinct to challenge logic, disrupt certainty, and reimagine the world. So when we bring poetry into this space, we feel that we're not just hosting an event, we're continuing a legacy. And tonight, we're especially thrilled for a special installment of Poetry at the Dalí, as this month, we are collaborating with Eckerd College for their National Poetry Month reading series, which is culminating tonight, very excitingly, with a reading by Natalie Diaz. Yeah. How lucky are we? And we, of course, give our heartfelt thanks to the entire team at Eckerd, and a very special shout out to Graywolf, whose dedication and enthusiasm make this collaboration possible. And now, to guide us into the heart of this evening, I'm honored to introduce the woman who brings this series to life each month. She's a poet, a professor, and the former poet laureate of St. Petersburg. Please join me in welcoming Helen Pruitt Wallace.
Hi, everybody. What a great turnout. It's wonderful to see you all. And thank you so much, Dr. Kim. We could not run the poetry series without you, and also without Samaya Ayad. Samaya, you're somewhere. Here she is. And Thomas, our AV guys in the back. Thank you back there. And of course, without Dr. Hank Hine, who unfortunately couldn't be here tonight. But he just gives so much to this program. And many of you know he's a poet himself. And he's been terrific. Oh, there you are. Hi, Hank. I'm sorry. I didn't see you slip in. Anyway, couldn't do it without him and without you. And thank you for your support going on 11 years. So I have the pleasure to introduce Gloria Monez. And Gloria is our current poet laureate, as Dr. Kim said. And she has been so terrific for our community. I know many of you probably already know Gloria because she does so much. You see her everywhere, and she's always working to promote poetry. And you know what? Those of you watching this program know, whether you're in this audience or you're watching from home, that poetry matters more now than ever, right? And so for the people who do work daily to bring poetry to our community, it's something we appreciate very much. So Gloria is going to introduce Natalie Diaz, and Gloria is a Colombian-American writer, and she's an advocate for multilingual literacy. She's the author of Your Biome Has Found You, Danzerly, and also This Is the Year, which is a wonderful hybrid of poetry and prose. It's just such a neat. If you haven't looked at that book, if you haven't bought it, it's just really cool to see how she melts together creative nonfiction and poetry. And I think many of you in the audience are writers, so take a look at how she does that so well. She's an Academy of American Poets Poet Laureate Fellow, which is a really big deal, super hard to get, and she got it for our community, which has allowed her, with the city's help, to do such great work in our community. And she's also doing all kinds of, really work even beyond our community. So please welcome Gloria Monez, who will introduce Natalie Diaz.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. Thank you to our arts defenders in the audience and people who work to bring art into the world every day. I also want to thank Celeste Davis from the city, who is working in, as you know, in public office to keep arts alive in the city. And the Dalí Museum and Helen and Eckerd College and Casey Wolf. We're here because of lots of logistical emails, a lot of emails. All right, and it brings me so much pleasure to introduce one of my favorite poets, a poet who I have read for a long time, and whose collections I return to and that I enjoy teaching, and that students are always like, oh, like an intro to creative writing classes, they're always like, wow, like this is what you can do in a poem. And I'm like, yes. So we're really, really lucky. If you didn't know how lucky we are to be here today, truly like take a big breath and consider yourself like so beyond lucky to hear Natalie Diaz. Natalie Diaz was born and raised in Fort Mojave Indian Village in Needles, California, and on the banks of Colorado River. She's an enrolled member of the Gila River Indian Tribe, author of poetry collections, Postcolonial Love Poem, which won the Pulitzer, and When My Brother Was an Aztec. Both are outside here from Tumblr Books, so if you don't have one, please get one afterwards. She's received many honors, including a MacArthur Fellowship, a Mellon Fellowship, a USA Fellowship, a Lannan Literary Fellowship, a Hodder Fellowship, a Pen American, and a New School Fellowship of a Native Arts and Culture Foundation Artist Fellowship as well. She also was a Rosenkranz Visiting Writer at Yale. Her work has been widely translated into Spanish, French, Portuguese, Danish, Swedish, Polish, and Slovenian. And she is right now working at Arizona State University as the Maxine and Jonathan Marshall Chair in Modern and Contemporary Poetry at ASU's Center for Imagination in the Borderlands. Please join me in welcoming one of my all-time favorite poets, Natalie Diaz.
Iwan Jahotan, Kivak Idum, Hakulo Imanch, Amich Tana. Me estoy alegra de estar aquí con todos ustedes. Gracias por venir. And gracias to all of the people and connections and emails that helped to bring me here. I'm terrible at emails, so I understand the feat of those. But gracias to Dr. Macquarie, to Casey Wolf. We've been talking basketball and lots of things. The world, really, which is always lucky when you arrive someplace and you're received by somebody so generous. And also when you arrive and there's just stories already happening. You remind me a lot of some of my brothers. This is not my first time to Tampa, and the person who brought me previously was a former visiting professor at Old Dominion where I did my MFA, and who became my friend, Peter Meinke. So Peter and Jeannie were very important to me, yeah. Ornery as ever, wonderful poet. It's where I think I first began to think about form and just, could put a few back, which I learned that as well as part of my poetics. So it's really lucky to be able to return here to a place where he was once the person receiving me. And thank you also to Dr. Macquarie's team at the Dalí Museum. My partner is a curator at the Whitney Museum, and so I know the incredible labors of love that you all, I lost track of where Kim was, but somewhere in there. But this, I know how much work it requires for these things to happen and to stay in touch with the community this way. And I'm echoing Sumaya Thomas and the sound team, whom I haven't met, but this is really great sound, so I don't have to stoop or tilt, so that's really wonderful. And very lucky to be among the poets and great hearts of Gloria, mil gracias, and Helen Pruitt Wallace and Dr. Hines. And echoing the sentiment of what Helen mentioned earlier, language matters. It's like the poet Solmaz Sharif has said, it matters what you call a thing. It's what one of my mentors, Ofelia Cepeda, said, language has power. And I believe in poetry. I think we always have these arguments. June Jordan makes great arguments for it. It can interdict a suicide, for example, she posits. There will always be the arguments of whether it can save a life or not. But I do think it helps us imagine our own lives and our lives alongside one another. And, there's no denying that the language we need right now today will become the language that we live with and live into in the future. So it's also been really lucky to be alongside the students and their very rigorously generous questions toward the work and toward language in general. Maybe something we can just think about together as I read. It's a question I ask my students all the time, and it seems like a maybe too large question at times, and perhaps it can even seem vague, but I believe in it, and it's a question I ask myself every morning. What is the language you need to live right now? Sometimes that might be a name. Sometimes it might be your own name and hearing it spoken. But what is the language we need? Because the language you need must become the language I also need, so that we might live alongside one another right now. And then the other thing I would just like to offer generally, and for those of you who are writers among us, we are taught very early to think of who is our audience. Like, well, who are you writing this for? Who's this? Who are you writing this to? And I'd like just to offer another question that I think is a part of the process, but part of an earlier process, which is whose stories am I made of? Whose stories do I bring every time I show up at the page? Or whose stories are a part of me that have come through somehow in this book? Maybe even strangers I never met, maybe ancestors I've heard of, or people I've met and lost along the way, or even people who are here with me now. So just to offer you that, just to the wonder of whose stories are you made of, and to think about how lucky it is that all those stories are in this room right now with us. And maybe some of those stories might wrestle with one another, but the beauty of it is that us being here together means that in the future they have a better chance of being told alongside one another. Postcolonial Love Poem. I've been taught bloodstones can cure a snake bite, can stop the bleeding. Most people forgot this when the war ended. The war ended depending on which war you mean. Those we started before those millennia ago and onward, those which started me, which I lost and won, these ever-blooming wounds. I was built by wage, so I wage love and worse, always another campaign to march across a desert night for the cannon flash of your pale skin, settling in a silver lagoon of smoke at your breast. I dismount my dark horse, bend to you there, deliver you the hard pool of all my thirsts. I learned drink in a country of drought. We pleasure to hurt, leave marks the size of stones, each a cabochon polished by our mouths. I, your lapidary wheel turning green, mottled red, the jaspers of our desires. There are wildflowers in my desert which take up to 20 years to bloom. The seeds sleep like geodes beneath hot feldspar sand until a flash flood bolts the arroyo, lifting them in its copper current, opens them with memory. They remember what their God whispered into their ribs. Wake up and ache for your life. Where your hands have been are diamonds on my shoulders, down my back, thighs. I am your culebra. I am in the dirt for you. Your hips are quartz light and dangerous, two rose-horn rams ascending a soft desert wash before the November sky untethers 100-year flood. The desert returns suddenly to its ancient sea. Arise the wild heliotrope, scorpion weed, blue phacelia, which hold purple the way a throat can hold the shape of any great hand. Great hands is what she called mine. The rain will eventually come or not. Until then, we touch our bodies like wounds. The war never ended and somehow begins again. You don't have to clap after all the poems. It's very lucky. It doesn't happen often. I was formerly a basketball player and I didn't get that much applause. So, so I write a lot about my brother, and as I've told some of the students before, the first book. I'll read a couple poems from this in a bit, but the first book, When My Brother Was an Aztec, this is about the Aztec is the image system I used for my real-life brother, who never really shows up in the poem except I carry him as the brother, my brother. But this brother, the photo is actually of my younger brother, Mino, who I just lost a couple years ago. We'll be coming up on 2 years. But my baby brother, so it just feels so lucky to have built something that he's a part of, that I can bring him in to the room with me. And his kids used to think this book was his. So because he was on the cover. So, every time somebody would come in the house, they'd be like, "Oh, do you want to see my dad's book?" And he got a kick out of that. And he would often ask me for copies because he would sign them for his friends. He was a real character. His name was Mino. But actually, I will read a poem from that. We talked about form today, and for those of you who are writers, sometimes the difficulty of form, but also the freedom it gives you, right? It's like if you put your kid in a room and say, "You're not leaving this room," they'll be bored for an hour, and then suddenly they pull out toys they'd forgotten existed, and suddenly they have this whole world built. But that's how I feel a lot about form. And this is a pantoum form, so anyone who's haunted by an image, it's a great form to try. You'll hear the repetition. I broke them a little bit, but 1, 3, 2, 4, they kind of turn over on each other. My brother at 3 a.m. He sat cross-legged, weeping on the steps when Mom unlocked and opened the front door. "Oh God," he said, "oh God, he wants to kill me, Mom." When Mom unlocked and opened the front door at 3 a.m., she was in her nightgown. Dad was asleep. "He wants to kill me," he told her, looking over his shoulder. 3 a.m. and in her nightgown, Dad asleep. "What's going on?" she asked. "Who wants to kill you?" He looked over his shoulder. "The devil does. Look at him, over there." She asked, "What are you on? Who wants to kill you?" The sky wasn't black or blue, but the green of a dying night. "The devil. Look at him, over there." He pointed to the corner house. The sky wasn't black or blue, but the dying green of night. Stars had closed their eyes or sheathed their knives. My brother pointed to the corner house. His lips flickered with sores. Stars had closed their eyes or sheathed their knives. "Oh God, I can see the tail," he said. "Oh God, look." Mom winced at the sores on his lips. It's sticking out from behind the house. Oh, God, see the tail, he said. Look at the goddamned tail. He sat cross-legged, weeping on the front steps. Mom finally saw it, a hellish vision. My brother. Oh, God, she said. And I'm going to read this next one. I talked about this with the students, but this first book I wrote, and I'm a patient writer, so I write a lot, and I just kind of hang on to things for a bit. So, my first book came out in 2012, my second in 2020, and that felt like a good time to me. I have a very good friend, Jim Richardson, who's a really funny poet, an older poet mentor friend of mine. But I remember before my second book came out, he said, because someone had come up and said, well, when's your next book coming out? I fumbled along with the answer, and he said, Natalie, is like, when someone asks when your next book is coming out, just tell them, oh, really? You should go back and read the first one first, So, but that book was it was much easier for people to see some of the darknesses in the book and to miss some of the tender moments, the moments of love. And so I'm going to read another poem about the brother as an example. Like in this second book, I know this again because students pin me on it all the time, but they're like, you said the word light 77 times. And I very intentionally did that in the second book, thinking about the ways I wanted to hold the body differently. And so I've tried very hard to treat every body and everybody in my book as the body of a beloved, even the most difficult bodies to love, such as my brother or even sometimes a stranger. So this is a poem that I feel is connected and in lineage and of the lineage of stories and emotions of that poem I read, the Pantoum. And this is just me tilting it to the light a little differently. Bloodlight. My brother has a knife in his hand. He has decided to stab my father. This could be a story from the Bible if it wasn't already a story about stars. I weep alacranes. The scorpions clatter to the floor like yellow metallic scissors. They land upside down on their backs and eyes, but writhe and flip to their segmented bellies. My brother has forgotten to wear shoes again. My scorpions circle him, whip at his heels. In them is what stings in me. It brings my brother to the ground. He rises, still holding the knife. My father ran out of the house, down the street, crying like a lamplighter. But nobody turned their lights on. It is dark. The only light left is in the scorpions. There is a small light left in the knife, too. My brother now wants to give me the knife. Some might say my brother wants to kill me. He tries to pass it to me like it is a good thing, like, don't you want a little light in your belly? Like the way Orion and Scorpius across all that black night passed the sun. My brother loosens his mouth between his teeth, throbbing red Antares. One way to open a body to the stars with a knife. One way to love a sister, help her bleed light. Yes, I appreciate it. This same brother I write about also taught me to play basketball, and that puts you in those positions where you wonder about those things. He was older than I was. He was a boy, which in a community like the reservation, you've been all of your ways of being strong and being a warrior have been taken away and reduced. And so I wonder a lot of times why I was the one who got to go to college and play ball, and my brother was the one who didn't. And so in some ways, I think some days, and writing helps me do this, I feel like sometimes he was just always up ahead, taking the heat so that I might have a different pathway behind him. But this is a story about res ball, which is the kind of ball we played. And Casey, we were just talking about these purse tournaments or these money tournaments, and So on the reservation, you just run. Everyone can shoot three-pointers. I think I'm the only Native American former basketball player who just wasn't a good three-point shooter. But otherwise, everybody else is. It's statistically proven. But this is to me what basketball meant. It meant other things later, but in the beginning, it was just my family, and it was just one small way we battled ourselves into existence. So, and this is also for those of you who write prose and might have a little bit different rhythm. Run and gun. Also, did anyone watch the Portland Trailblazers way back in the day? No. I realize time changes, so I'm not going to update the player, though, this time. I'm going to keep it back in that, to the player, yeah, who I loved when I was little. Run and gun. I learned to play ball on the res, on outdoor courts where the sky was our ceiling. Only a tribal kid shot has an arc made of sky. We balled in the res park against a tagged backboard with a chain for a net where I watched a Wallapai boy from Peach Springs dunk the ball in a pair of flip-flops and slip on the slick concrete to land on his wrist. His radius fractured and ripped up through his skin like a tusk, which didn't stop him from pumping his other still beautiful arm into the air and yelling, "Yeah, Clyde the Glide, motherfuckers," before some adult sped him off to the emergency room. I ran games in the abandoned schoolyard with an 8-foot fence we had to hop, where I tore so many pairs of shorts on the top spikes, and where when my little brother got snagged trying to climb down, my cousin and I let him hang by the waistband of his underwear for an entire game of 11. And if that cousin hadn't overdosed on heroin a few years later, he might have proved us right and been the first res Jumpman. I got run by my older brother on our slanted driveway, the same brother I write about now, who taught me that there is nothing easy in our desert, who blocked every shot I ever took against him until I was about 12 years old. By then, his addictions had stolen his game, while I found mine. I learned the game with my brothers and cousins, with my friends and enemies. We had jacked up shoes and mismatched socks. Our knees were scabbed and we licked our lips chapped. We were small, but we learned to play big enough to beat the bigger, older, white kids at the rec center on the hill, which to get to, we crossed underneath the I-40 freeway, across the train tracks, and through a great big sandy wash. We played bigger and bigger until we began winning. And we won by doing what all Indians before us had done against their bigger, whiter opponents. We became coyotes and rivers, and we ran faster than their fancy kicks could up and down the court. Game after game, we became the weather. We blew by them. We rained buckets. We lit up the gym with our moves. We learned something more important than fist. At least at that age, we learned to make guns of our hands, and we pulled the trigger on jumpers all damn day. And when they talked about the way we played, they called it run and gun, and it made them tired before they ever stepped on the court. Just thinking about a pickup game against us made the white boys from the junior high and high school teams go to sleep. And while they slept, we played our dreams. We were talking about like other lexicons that we pull into our creative works, and I definitely think basketball is a sensuality that has made me also the poet who I am. So they don't feel that different to me, the poetry and basketball. I've always had a lot of trouble with anxiety, right? Of course, when I was little, it's like there was no time for anxiety, so nobody wanted to listen to that. So you just made do. But, I've never been a good sleeper. I have lots of dreams. Speaking of Dalí and dreams, Mojave culture, it's a dream culture. So we say, sumachahot is like that I hope you arrive at your dreams. And we don't just mean at night. We mean all the things that everybody has been dreaming for you to arrive at, and that you've been dreaming for yourself as well, even before you knew. So it's a weird thing. It's like it's not a metaphor, but it's hard sometimes to explain, and that, you are being dreamed and you are also the dreamer. But, so I've just always been kind of an insomniac. And I believe so much in the power of language. I think probably all of us in this room do. And we've seen it, right? We've seen what language can do to harm people, but we've also seen what language can do to light up someone's face, or even the way we feel when people say our names, or, to think of a beloved calls your name out, what that feels like suddenly you appear in a different way. But so I was asking myself, I sit here and struggle with all of these anxieties, and I was like, if language truly has this power, what if I just called it something else? Would that make a difference? What if I just quit saying anxiety and I tried to reorganize it in a different way? And so of course I don't think it solved it, but it did give me another poem, which which is one thing your anxiety can do. From the Desire Field. I don't call it sleep anymore. I'll risk losing something new instead, like you lost your rosen moon, shook it loose. But sometimes when I get my horns in a thing, a wonder, a grief, or a line of her, it is a sticky and ruined fruit to unfasten from, despite my trembling. Let me call my anxiety desire then. Let me call it a garden. Maybe this is what Lorca meant when he said, verde, que te quiero verde. Because when the shade of night comes, I am a field of it, of any worry ready to flower in my chest. My mind in the dark is una bestia, unfocused, hot, and if not yoked to exhaustion beneath the hip and plow of my lover, then I am another night wandering the desire field, bewildered in its low green glow, belling the meadow between midnight and morning. Insomnia is like spring that way, surprising, and many-petaled, the kick and leap of gold grasshoppers at my brow. I am struck in the witched hours of want. I want her green life, her inside me in a green hour I can't stop. Green vein in her throat, green wing in my mouth, green thorn in my eye. I want her like a river goes, bending, green, moving. Fast as that, this is how it happens. Soy una sonambula. And even though you said today you felt better, and it is so late in this poem, is it okay to be clear, to say, I don't feel good? To ask you to tell me a story about the sweetgrass you planted and tell it again or again until I can smell its sweet smoke, leave this thrashed field and be smooth. And of course, as you know, Lorca and Dalí were alongside each other at some point. So, but yeah, I think a lot about, we talked a little bit about translation, very beautiful questions. Again, the students were quite generous. But we talked a little bit about translation, and I think that's possibly one of the most difficult or the most mistranslated line is that verde que te quiero verde, because we always translate it to like green how I want you green, or green that I want you green, and I think it's intended to be an impossibility, the impossibility of desire, like so much so that, you know, it's green, it's life, it's eruption, it's exploding. I can't find language for it. And in Mojave, our word for green it's a verb. So it is the thing the flower does when it buds, so it bursts. So it's always been a line that's just kind of intrigued me and stuck with me. I'm going to read. This is a poem a student mentioned earlier. This is, I mean, I think sometimes some of the most powerful poems, whether you're writing them and learning something about yourself or whether you're reading them and thinking about your relationship to the world, but are just some of the most mundane. And a person who became a friend of mine was Ted Kuzer, and he actually was part of the reason why I had a first book to begin with, is just he kind of believed I had one when I didn't. And he asked me, he said, like, I'm going to give you some advice. Like, if anybody ever, asks you if you have a poetry manuscript, even if you don't, just go home and get it together and send it to them. And I said, okay, thank you, Mr. Kuzer. And he's like, all right. And then he said, do you have a poetry manuscript? And and I said, I really don't have one. And then he's like, no, you're missing the whole boat. But this, I was lucky to be at this place, Idlewild in California, between my reservation and Los Angeles, and it's they have like a native program there. But Ted was there, and this was this was an exercise. Like it was one of the first poems I really wrote. But it was like, can you take something very mundane and make it feel like a miracle to you? And it just so happened that there were like bowls of apples all over the table. So I watch her eat the apple. She twirls it in her left hand, a small red merry-go-round. According to the white oval sticker, she holds apple number 4016. I had to learn all about that. I've read in some book or other of 4,015 fruits she held before this one, each equally dizzied by the heat in the tips of her fingers. She twists the stem, pulls it like the pen of a grenade, and I just know. Somewhere someone is sitting alone on a porch, bruised, opened up to their wet white ribs, riddled by her teeth, lucky. With her right hand, she lifts the sticker from the skin. Now the apple is more naked than any apple has been since two bodies first touched the leaves of ache in the garden. Maybe her apple is Macintosh. Maybe red delicious. I only know it is the color of something I dreamed, something I gave to her after being away for 10,000 nights. The apple pulses like a red bird in her hand. She is setting the red bird free, but the red bird will not go. So she pulls it to her face as if to tell it a secret. She bites, cleaving away a red wing. The red bird sings. Yes, she bites the apple, and there is music. A branch breaking, a ship undone by the shore, a knife making love to a wound, the sweet scrape of a match lighting the lamp of her mouth. This blue world has never needed a woman to eat an apple so badly, to destroy an apple, to make the apple bone, and she does it. I watch her eat the apple, carve it to the core and set it wobbling on the table. A broken bell I beg to wrap my red skin around until there is no apple. There is only this woman who is a city of apples. There is only me licking the juice from the streets of her palm. If there is a God of fruit or things devoured, and this is all it takes to be beautiful, then God, please let her eat another apple tomorrow. Gracias. I think we're, yeah, and I think. Yeah, I thought that, yeah, that felt like a good, I have no concept of time, so I'm like, I'm gonna just, yeah. So if anyone has questions or wonders, I'm more than happy to give a shot at answering them, so yeah.
I'm curious because I first read Postcolonial Love Poem, the poem that was wrote a couple of years ago, and it was online, so I didn't see the cover. And when I read it, I experienced these images of this beautiful desert and night and just this mythical landscape. And when I saw the cover, I thought it looked almost sterile. And then I listened to a podcast and I felt like a jackass because you were talking about how you chose the cover intentionally trying to obscure your face to kind of push against the fetishization of Native women. So I was wondering how your thoughts on that has changed, if at all, how your relationship to the cover has changed.
Yeah, well, don't ever let me make you feel like a jackass. That's not, save it for something really good. Like, don't, no, but I mean, it's an interesting question, right? Especially all the different ways we come to writing now. Well, so one, like I said, that this was the first book, it has my little brother on it. And this is actually related because when my press, who's an incredible press, Copper Canyon Press, they sent me the photo they wanted to use for this, which was a really beautiful photo by Graciela Iturbide, a Mexican photographer. If you don't know her work, it's really incredible. I love her writing as well. But it was like a Semana Santa festival in Oaxaca. And like, my brother is 6'5", and like, you don't often find 6'5" natives in Oaxaca, right? And it was a beautiful image, but what it made me realize is like, they had one idea of whatever is Mexican or Latina or, you know, my family is Spanish and Mexican. I have family from the north of Spain, and then my family's from Zacatecas by way of like Argentina. But, you know, so and it's not right, whether they say don't judge a book by its cover, but it did feel important to me that they were giving me the option. And so I had a friend whose husband was a photographer who just happened to be like hanging out with us that weekend. And, you know, they're like, I can try to take a photo for you. And then my little brother, who didn't know my friend's husband was with her, came up the street with no shirt on, jogging, and was trying to be very like cool because he's like a big muscular guy. And he's like, oh, I heard Mom said you had a friend in town. And I'm like, yeah, her and her husband, they're both here. But my friend Berto, Mary's husband Berto, was like, oh, like, God, let's take a photo of your brother. Like, because I wanted the book to have the people. I wanted to look like the people who I was actually imagining when I wrote it, right? Which seems simplistic, except it's super important. So then when I came to this book, I thought like, okay, like the difference between my first book and my second book, I think, and one of the students, again, very astutely picked up on this. They're like, in the first book, the speaker is always watching from a distance. And it's true, because like this subject was so hard. It's like, I can barely look at my brother in real life. I've hugged him maybe twice in the last 5 years. So writing the book about him let me hold him more closely. It let me love him better simply by not looking away. And so it taught me, even that small move, right, which is, they're not the poems in the book, but it's how do you think of the book itself? So having that cover really made me think about what a book might mean to me of who's at stake. And so this book felt very different to me in regard, especially to the fact that I was kind of challenging myself to, I want you, Natalie, to treat everybody in this book as if it's the body of the beloved. Like, you know, and I don't know that I achieved that in every moment, but so immediately I felt like I was the one most at stake there, which is why I had been working on, someone asked me of all things to do, can I write something to help celebrate Edward Curtis's like centennial or something? Which I'm sure I know the photos are beautiful, but I also see that they're like my Mojave people and them misnamed, all wearing the same garb. So it just felt like an ironic thing that they asked me to write for this catalog. And so instead I did like these images, and in the image, and so what you're referring to is, it's a weird photo, right? Like it's, what I tried to do was use the camera and focus only on the artifact. So we're beaders in my tribe. So these beads were made by my elder. And then in the back, which you can't even tell, you know, without me saying it, but I had like the painting that a warrior would wear, which is very gendered in my community. So I would never have been able to wear the paint in my hair or on my arms that the warriors would have worn, but I did that on the back. So anyway, you know, I think that's a fine like way to think about it, because I do think of post-colonial as a sterile word. So I think you're hitting it right on the head. I think the way you're coming to it is exactly within the realm of the way it exists, and I hope it exists. And then the troubling, right? Like, how do you hold a word like post-colonial? Whoever knows what that means, right? Yeah. And if it happened or is happening or might yet have happened, I don't know. But then to hold that next to like a love poem or something beloved. So I think that that's how I would meet you with it. But I think you're right on. I think you're meeting it in the right kind of curiosity and critique, which feels very important to me. I don't think I answered that, but yeah.
Hey, Natalie, I have a question. But first, thank you for being here and for reading your words. Entonces, primero quiero empezar. You started us with these two questions. What is the language that we need to live right now? And whose stories am I made of? Wondering if you could expand on that first one, and if I can pose it to you. What's the language or lexicon that you've been relying on today, now? What are you bringing into your work? And for us, how can we use language as a tool of resistance?
Yeah, well, I'll say a couple things, and like one, there are two words that are super important to me, and we talked a little bit about them today when we unfolded them across the classes, but I like the word of. I think of it in terms of inheritance and lineage, and it's like, who are you of? You know, because like, who am I of? I think there's also something of like continuance in that. There's an out of timeness of. It implies who was there before you, but that you're also becoming. So you're in motion towards something else, whether that's your autonomous self or your collective in your community. And the word alongside, just super important to me. And I'll say a little bit more about that because I think it applies to this word resistance and whatever that means to each of us. I'm really interested in the words, like we know all the words how to fight. We know those. Like you know exactly how to hurt the people you know with the words you know. And that's why they say like no one can hurt you as much as the people who know you, right? Like so that's like easy, right? Like that's the unrigorous part of sometimes the way language makes us move. It becomes shorthand, shortcuts. But there's also a much more like rigorously generous way, I think, in which I think we all do this, and I think we sometimes aren't able to stop for a moment and appreciate that we've done it, so we feel always at odds. You know, I know very well how to fight against something, but I want to know like how to fight for something. And like what I mean by alongside is And you know, I grew up on a reservation, so I'll try to stay on the mic. I grew up on a reservation, so my neighbors were my family, for better and a lot worse, and for a lot worse. You know, like you could be down the block and get a small spanking for doing something you weren't supposed to. You're like, wait a minute, I'm not even at home. The surveillance was unbelievable. But also, even if they weren't my blood, they were of my family, right? Because on the reservation, you have the gift. You know, it can be a burden at times, but it's the gift of knowing you're of a collective. You belong, and you're never like alone. It doesn't mean you can't be lonely, but you're definitely like never alone there. And so, to me, that this idea of being alongside came of that. But I also think it's very much like a basketball term, right? Like, I mean, I've only ever been in groups. I'm one of 11. I played basketball my whole life. I live on a reservation, which everybody knows everybody. And so it's you know, when I say alongside, like I think the question it's a question for myself. It's the language I need, but I'm also not quite sure how to do it all the time. But it's you know, like one of the ways I pose this in class is like, what does it mean to be alongside one another if we don't necessarily understand one another? And why would we need to, right? We were talking about translation when this came up, but it's like most of our lives are spent misunderstanding one another or reading ourselves into what someone is talking about, right? I think that's what empathy is. Like, I don't know that I will know how you might feel, but I know how I would feel if it happened to me. I think that's what empathy is. And it doesn't have to be problematic. Like, to me, that's just what it means. But even if I can't understand what it would feel like, and even if I can't imagine what would happen if it happened to me, I would want to still be alongside you for that, right? So it's like, if maybe what you say you need and want, I don't think I need and want that. But how do I still stand beside you while you have what you need and want, right? And it sometimes seems easy, right? It's like, you know, my partner is Black. The way I think of freedom is not the way my partner thinks of freedom. But if my partner has this definition of freedom and it has parameters that they need, I want to be right there next to them so that they have that. And I think why it's important right now in terms of the language I think I need is because it's going to get harder. It's already harder. We're all going to get to that point where the thing you need looks like it might be getting in the way of what I need, or it looks like it might foreclose what I need. So what do we do then? And the quickest thing to do is always our physical reactions, right? A fight, a battle, a war. But I do believe like the language is not the body, but it carries our bodies to one another. And most importantly, I think it carries all the things our bodies know of what's happened in the past. And so I would love to think, I don't know that I can be right now, I don't know if I have the language to be right now, but I would love to think that I could get to the point alongside beloveds and strangers where the thing they needed, if it was not harming me, is something I could somehow find a way to stand alongside and support them toward having that, even if it was not part of my goal or value system. And, you know, I don't want that to try, I'm not trying to be super philosophical, but I feel like I see it every day. I see it in my classrooms, I see it in my community, I see it in our larger communities, we see it in our world. And that's one thing I think basketball had for me at the time. I could bring every worry, every trouble, every joy, every triumph, every even desire to want to win or to conquer. I could bring that all in the basketball court. And there's something about poetry that has the capacity to hold that, you know. And I think people could argue that fiction does and essay does, but I think poetry in particular was built with the capacity, like it's, poetry is like a clock. I love watches and clocks. I can't afford most of the ones I want, but I love them. But if you ever open up an old Clockworks and you see all the different things happening at the same time, and you see like, you know, this is moving, but wait, this stopped this, but this is not losing energy. It's still moving its potential energy. Like that's, I think, the way a poem happens. It happens like a clock, you know, all of these things are happening at the same time. And yes, sometimes we equate them to a meaning or an understanding or an hour of the day or evening. But yeah, so that's, again, like I had warned that I give long-winded answers, but Camilo, yeah, no, that I would, that's 2 hours later. That's how I would answer that question. Yeah, but again, like I really believe it. Like I know that things are wayward and wily, and I think depending on who you are and where you are in the world, you could always say that. But I do think that poetry is a form of human beings that we were either gifted with or we created so that we could be alongside one another in our impossibilities and our unreasonabilities, right? You know, because I think there's nothing more unreasonable or, like I said earlier, like incongruous than the world we live in. And the fact that we're expected to come with our entire lives. I can't even believe like we can be friends and have relationships, and like to think we came from entirely different places as whole human beings and then we're expected to be next to each other. I mean, I know that there are some bad things going on, but God, I think we're kind of miraculous for even being able to do it, I think. And poetry helps me remember that. So, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, gracias.
Hi. Earlier at Eckerd, you mentioned that you're in a sort of critical of metaphor phase right now, and I wanted to ask if you would elaborate on that or just say what that means for you.
Yeah, well, critical can be good. It doesn't have to be bad. No, my students, my grad students, I'm always like, they're like, I can tell by their face, they're like, here she goes again. She's going to talk about the simile again or the metaphor. I think the pressure I want to put on the metaphor is, maybe thinking of what it means to be like multitudinous or to live in a condition of multiplicity or, like allness that doesn't, again, have to be as measured. So in the book, I talk about the fact that the way we say who we are in Mojave is we say ha-makav, which ha is any word that has water in it will begin with that. So ha, like, so for example, duck, because a duck is in water, Its old name is Hanamo, but we say Hanamo now, like as a shortened form. But our river, the Colorado River, which is the most endangered river in the US, I believe again this year, it's called Hahavil. And so we're named for, the Hamakav means like that the river runs through the middle of our body. But for us, body and land are the same. So it also means the river runs through the middle of our land. So what was considered Makav Amatinch, or Mojave land, was basically everything around that river, which is where we live, the river valley. It's the Colorado River Basin is what the actual place is. So it's about hour and a half, 2 hours from what you might know as Death Valley, 29 Palms, we're just down the road from that. The salt flats, the lava beds, all there because there was a lot of volcanic action. But like, so normally that would be a metaphor, right? Like, oh, you carry the river in your body. But that's not the way I learned it, right? So I think for me, like, I always just want to put a pressure on the metaphor because sometimes the metaphor is, we feel like they both can't be happening at the same time. Like one either consumes the other so that it can occur, or one is there to, in some way now the second thing can't occur without the first having occurred. And so I think a lot about that, about metaphor, or I would say any movement or momentum of language. But for me, the importance of knowing that when I say hamakav, like I don't think of that metaphorically. I actually can't imagine thinking without the river being a part of my thinking, and in the ways that I was taught, we think we were imagined by our rivers and our oceans and our mountains, like that, I mean, we're the youngest being, right? Like, how could that have happened? All these things were doing whatever they were doing without us, like God bless the geologists for giving us some numbers to work with. But yeah, so I that's just kind of what I mean about, I think I'm always like using the Mojave language and Spanish sometimes, but it's a newer language. And my Spanish is very like Castilian Spanish because that's where I learned it from my grandmother. And so it's not an Indio Spanish, which is like what some of my friends and other family speak. But yeah, so for me, I'm just always trying to like really like demand the physicality of language. And in terms of the metaphor, in my mind, I always want to say like, I want them both to be able to happen, or I want them to not need to equal a meaning, but to be some sort of disruption in our senses and our sensuality. Because I know we think of metaphor as like allowing us to understand something, but I actually think the metaphors, another way, or maybe an important way alongside that, is that metaphors allow us to be so much more sensual, right? Sensual beyond like meaning in our minds, which feels important to me. Yeah, is this being recorded? Because I'm gonna have to be careful about that metaphor comment. I'm gonna come back and edit it. All the metaphor purists are gonna get me.
I'm sorry, Natalie, but it is live streamed.
Natalie, I want to say thank you, first of all, for such an amazing
gracias a
reading
ti.
and such a terrific Q&A. I mean, you've said so many things tonight that are just absolutely profound. Would you mind kind of tag teaming on the question of metaphor? Could you talk a little bit about craft? Could you talk a little bit about where your ideas for poems come from, how you begin the crafting of the poem, and how you get into revision? I hate to take away from all the other wonderful things you said, but if you don't mind addressing that as well, that would be great.
I'm like super anti-craft. No, I'm just no. Well, so what I try to do with my students, because I know craft is like, right, it's a structure, it's a series of choices, and so I guess something that's very important to me, and thank you, Helen, for the question. One is, I think of, like, just for example, if any of you had the book, I don't read line breaks. So already that tells you something about the way I craft a line break, right? The line breaks, which as we talked about today, are very dangerous feeling to the prose writer. It's like, wait a minute, Like, is this white space pooling me as I'm reading? Like, what's happening? Is this a vacuum or what's happening? But it's not that, so there's a couple ways that I think I experience the poem. And one of those ways is, yes, with my eye, like, and we all have different sensibilities and different abilities and disabilities, but because I read with my eyes and I listen with my ears and I write, with my hands. So one way I'm looking is like with my eye, as I see the page, the line across the page. And so there's a way, again, back to the clockworks. And I would say the clockworks is probably one of the most important, like, poetic framings that I have with my work. It's the way I teach my students to revise, is with these kind of clockworks questions. But, so I think very much about the line as a physicality, but I also think of it as a unit of image, less a unit of meaning and more a unit of image, meaning how is the image beginning to occur? And then I think for me, when the line breaks sonically and aurally and rhythmically, I don't even register that. Like, I'm still, my heart is still beating with like the next lines. And so if you hear me read, like, I don't read line breaks because they don't occur that way to me. But they are, because the same parts of our brain fire when we're reading poems in our head to ourselves as when we're hearing poems, which I just find fascinating. So it's like whatever our body is sensing is very, it's beyond what we know how to funnel or how to like compartmentalize. So I would say for me, I'm thinking very muscularly about the line. And so that's a reason why for me, I'm building the body of an image, what I'm giving, what I'm taking away. That's a kind of way I think craft-wise about the line. But I'm not usually trying to stop it at a unit of meaning, which it can work that way, like we talked today. Like sometimes that's what that is, that unit of the line becomes a unit of meaning, that maybe it becomes a narrative, or, if it's working in a lyrical way. I also don't differentiate between narrative and lyric, but that's a different story. But I think another thing that I think a lot about is I think about a lot about poetry the way I think about basketball. So I think about momentum. So for me, a line can have different momentums all in a single line, much less in an entire poem. And so, like one of the great joys for me as I'm writing poetry is like, I try to figure out all the different ways I can disrupt my own poem. So it's like in the poem, the title poem, Postcolonial Love Poem. Like I say, I am in the dirt for you. It's a very short line, end stop at the period. Next line, short line, end stop at the period. I am your culebra. I'm in the dirt for you. And I wanted those to feel, for example, like a stanza break without having to break the stanza. So for me, everything is a kind of physicality that I'm really trying to treat it like a body, like imagining it's almost like clay to me, even though it's also language happening. So, and in terms of like where they come from, how they occur, a lot of it is really like just deep meditation and an image or a word. I play a lot with form, but it's more play for me. And I always need to find like a small break in the fence where I can like slip through it of a form. And I guess maybe another thing I'll say about craft, we talked a little bit about this. My first book has really long lines. And the second book has maybe middling length lines, except there's as much energy in those. And so for me, one of the ways I think about whether those, I know it seems like I'm giving a line break craft talk, but that's not what I'm intending to do. It's just that I'm thinking about what can hold energy in a poem. And one of the ways that I write is definitely with excess. So, like they say less is more. I'm like, nope, more is more. Like more is more. And and the fact that I said light 70 plus times, or the fact that I say hips so much, like I was half joking with students, but this was true that, I had someone give me feedback on a poem and they were like, you said the word hip twice, and it's like, yeah, but don't you, how many hips do you, like, you got one hip, there should at least be two, or even if you only count each side as one, then there's at least me and you, like what? But it was in that moment that I was like, oh, it's not that I've said it too much, I just haven't said it enough. And not even for the reader, but for myself, to really crack it open, right? And so for me, I think a lot about agglutination. I think about accumulation. And I think of excess. I don't think hyperbole is a bad thing. I love it. I'm if you've ever written a love letter, then you lie, right? Because there's no way you can say what you feel, so you're lying, right? You're being exaggerating. You're trying so hard to say the inexplicable thing. And so to me, that's another way of sensuality, right? And some of that might simply be because I grew up in the desert. And so excess is like saying, the sky looks kind of weird and my skin feels kind of funny. I think there's going to be a storm, right? That's a little bit exaggerative, except it's creating this hyper sensuality in you. So those are just some of the things that I feel like are a part of my poetics that become the choices or the craft choices I make on the page, are in relationship to those lines and those muscularities, or thinking about, what have I not done enough of yet? How can I push this beyond to the point of a kind of ecstatic that doesn't just become language, but makes me feel arrive back at my body again in a physical way. So, and it's part of why I love reading poems, or just reading out loud, around my house. And my mom used to do that to us when we were little. And I just think it's one of the luckiest things, is to read out loud to somebody you love, or in this case, strangers, but also to be read to by someone you love. And so those are, I think, very important to how language happens on the page, even if I'm not doing that out loud. So thank you. Gracias for the question.
I think that's probably all we have time for.
Yeah, I wouldn't start me on another one. So gracias a todos.
I have the unenviable task of following Natalie Diaz. To close us out tonight, I want to thank everyone for being here. And I want to thank especially this evening cannot be possible without the Dr. Peter Menke Endowment for Creative Writing. And I'm really happy to close this loop as well on that. When Natalie and I pulled up to park in the parking lot over here at the security booth, I rolled the window down and I said, we're here for poetry. And they go, yeah, go on. And we were just kind of marveling at that statement of we're here for poetry. And so I want to thank Gloria and Helen and Hank and Kim and everybody at Dalí, our Dean of Faculty, Dr. Christine Woolley, who's a great supporter of this series, and all of you, and especially Natalie, for being here for poetry. Thank you very much.